Alright, what's up y'all? So I'm making this video because there are two issues that are just so misunderstood by leftists, yet they're so linked and they have so much in common. On this channel I talk a ton about one of them, which is veganism, and I feel like I cannot in good faith continue talking about that injustice without talking about how it's linked to another huge injustice. And that's what's happening in Palestine. Yeah, I know I'm going there. And again, these issues are so linked, and it's astounding how much they have in common. And it's not just the hummus. So let's get started. So both topics are just so grossly misunderstood. Vegan? My daughter's vegan. She's an animal lover just like you. Oh, that's cool, but I'm not really an animal lover. I mean, look, I don't want to be controversial, but I just don't think humans and animals are the same, you know? Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I don't really think that either. But anyways, you enjoy your lettuce and tomatoes, son. Or, you know, this is why I'm against organized religion. Just causing all this fighting over there in Israel, you know, they just can't accept each other. Yeah, I get that, but the reason they say something like Free Palestine is because, oh, so you're pro-Palestine. Bit of a Jew hater, are we? I got some friends back in Charlottesville I think you'd love. What? Jesus Christ, no! Oh, that's my bad. But you are pro-terrorist, right? And both topics, when presented to pronoun-respecting, anti-capitalist, BLM marching leftists, get them to start spitting right-wing talking points and like high-fiving Ben Shapiro. But anyway, so let me clear some stuff up at the start of this video. Veganism is people believing that animals don't deserve to be killed for unnecessary reasons, right? So you don't have to love animals. As a matter of fact, I can hardly stand them. And people who advocate for Palestine believe that Palestinians deserve the same rights as Israel gives its Jewish population. And right now that's not the case. And the difference in rights takes a lot of different forms. Lack of rights to land, lack of proper representation in the government, lack of rights to their dignity, to freedom of movement, lack of rights to their own lives, to essentially just live as free people like you and me. And that's putting it nicely. The reality is that these people are subject to violence, humiliation, and terror on a daily basis. And that's been their reality for 75 years. And this isn't my opinion. Human rights groups have come out and labeled Israel as an apartheid in the same way that South Africa was an apartheid. And these groups document how Palestinians have been denied their basic rights by Israel. Because remember, Palestinians live under Israeli rule. That's why you can't both sides of this shit. You can't all lives matter this shit. One side has the ability to and does strip the other of their basic rights. And let me tell you what, it's the Palestinians getting the short end of that stick. And they just kind of have to live with it. Palestinians are second-class citizens by virtue of being Palestinian. You know, in the US, there was a time where the black community was treated as second-class citizens, and we all kind of realized how f***ed that was. You know, we had a whole civil rights movement about it. And sometimes they resorted to violence there too. And yeah, we can condemn that violence, but that doesn't take away from the rights that they deserved. And so the reality is that veganism and Free Palestine both fall under the umbrella of anti-oppression movements like BLM, pro-LGBT, feminism. Veganism is fighting against the oppression of animals, and Free Palestine, or Palestinian liberation, is fighting against the oppression of Palestinians. But the last two movements I just mentioned are hardly ever recognized as going along with the other anti-oppression movements. But these movements are all fundamentally aligned in their core beliefs. They're all anti-oppression movements. And when it comes to veganism in Palestine, a lot of the times these issues are treated as if they weren't black and white. But honestly, they're just as black and white as feminism or pro-LGBT or Black Lives Matter. But most leftists do not understand veganism and Free Palestine, and they don't realize how their stances on those issues further contribute to oppression. And that threatens their identity as leftists. And there's nothing worse you can do to a leftist than threaten their leftist pride. I would know. Guilty. And when you're looking at the two movements, whether it be Free Palestine or veganism, you'll notice that those in favor of the movements are calling for peace, and those against the movements or on the other side of the movements are inherently calling for violence. Here, I'll walk you through what I mean. Being against Palestinian liberation, for example, means for calling Palestinians to continue living under a violent apartheid regime. And people who consume meat and animal products advocate for violence, whether they realize it or not. I mean, how else do those animals wind up on the plate? On the other hand, the mainstream narrative for Palestinian liberation is not a justification for Hamas. It's not calling for violence. It's a call to end the ruthless occupation that Palestinians live under every day and have the same rights as the Jewish population of Israel, and essentially just, again, live as free people, hence Free Palestine. Someone who's for Israel might say they want peace, but if that doesn't come with a call to end the violent apartheid regime that the Palestinians live under, then it's largely meaningless and just sounds like they want the Jewish population to live undisturbed while the Palestinians should just submit and die. peacefully. In the same vein, vegans advocate for nonviolence. They advocate for peace. Vegans want to end the senseless violence and terror that we subject animals to. So if you hashtag stand for Israel, or if you're on the side of consuming animals and animal products, then you're standing on the side of violence, whereas standing for Palestine and veganism is the side of nonviolence. All right, so I just spent that whole time clearing up a lot of confusion. This might be the first time some of y'all are even hearing this stuff. So you might be thinking, well, why the fuck haven't I heard about this before? And largely both movements have been voiceless. So, vegans were very familiar with that term, speaking up for the voiceless, anonymous for the voiceless, because animals literally don't have voices. They can't speak up for themselves. But pro-Palestinian voices have also been historically suppressed, especially in the West. After the heinous October 7th attacks, for example, Western correspondents were able to go to Israel and interview the families and cover extensively the grief that those families were feeling. But Israel was not allowing foreign journalists to enter Gaza and cover the suffering of those families, who were being extensively bombed. Or the Western media heavily featured the stories of the Israeli hostages, and they showed the videos of released hostages and their families, but they largely did not show the reunion of the Palestinian prisoners with their families. Palestinian prisoners, by the way, who the vast majority were never formally charged, but held as prisoners anyway. People have reported losing their speaking spots if they're going to talk about the horrifying conditions of Gaza on mainstream news. Palestinians who are invited to speak on Western news channels are almost always asked if they condemn Hamas. But Israeli guests are almost never asked to condemn their government's apartheid policies and their bombing of Gaza. So the Western media always prioritizes the Israeli narrative, and in the best case leaves the Palestinians as an afterthought, or just straight up ignores the realities of the terror that Palestinians are subject to every day. That's how you get situations like, man, I can't believe they would attack them unprovoked. So messed up. The fuck you mean open air prison? And for those of y'all who didn't get that, Gaza, part of occupied Palestine that the October 7th attacks came out of, has famously been described as an open air prison. And right now we're in our social media era, so people are increasingly getting their news from different sources like TikTok. And they're being exposed to perspectives that have largely been ignored. And that's why now more and more people are starting to understand what Palestinians are going through. Sorry, am I pointing at y'all too much? It's fucking listen to me. Fucking listen to me. But anyway, so the bias in Western media is largely how you get people saying things like, wow, these Jews can't catch a break. They're attacking them just because they're Jewish. So anti-Semitic. But remember, it has nothing to do with their Jewishness and everything to do with the fact that this government strips them of their basic rights. I mean, even if their occupiers were Mexican, they'd probably hate them. And everyone loves Mexicans. But yeah, when you misrepresent the objectives of a campaign, it makes it so much easier to smear. Vegans are all too familiar with this. They'll say, oh, they're trying to control what other people eat. Why do they care? Can't they just leave us alone? And yeah, obviously that sounds insane if there was a group of people writing for everyone to go gluten-free. But notice something similar in both cases? They conveniently leave out the victims. The Palestinians and the animals. And in both cases, when people are confronted with the moral dilemma, you'll hear them say, but it's complicated. Yeah, no shit it's complicated when you're trying to justify a genocide. When you try to justify a massacre of billions of animals. Yeah, of course it's hard to justify when you're taking the oppressor's perspective. Yeah, you gotta do some crazy ass mental gymnastics just to land on, it's complicated. When you look at it from the victim's perspective, it's so clear. You'd also be shocked to see that the Israeli playbook and the meat-eating playbook are basically identical. Or I don't know, maybe you wouldn't be shocked. They put out tons of information, every worm, every rodent, every bird, every uncle that's killed to make your vegetables. So vegans kill more. We didn't headshot that American journalist, that was the Palestinians. Okay, maybe it was us. And so yeah, all that soy is what's killing the rainforest. And guess who eats soy? Vegans. 40 beheaded babies. Never substantiated, by the way. Didn't stop good old Joe from repeating it though. Or dude, that Gaza footage is fake. That does not represent the reality of what's happening. Dude, that slaughterhouse footage is so fake. That does not represent what's happening. They just picked the worst slaughterhouses. Even the arguments that people use to defend Israel are sometimes exactly the same. Oh, it's okay to kill an animal if it's done humanely. Oh, it's okay to bomb people's houses and buildings if it's done humanely. We let them know in advance. No, we know there's no ethical way to do the wrong thing. Oh, it's war, people die. Sounds a shitload like circle of life to me. As vegans, we know that just because something is bad doesn't mean that we should accept it and then continue to add to it. Well, Don't you care about other issues? Like, why are you worrying so much about this one? And for vegans, we know that it's because as a population, we are directly causing it. And similarly for Palestine, it's because our Western governments are greenlighting it and a lot of the times directly funding it. And it's able to continue because of the public's misunderstanding of the situation. And sadly, when it comes to both veganism and Palestine, you've got a ton of people on the side of mass violence. And they don't even realize it. And for vegans, we got crop deaths though, nature though, culture, we got all those arguments. But on the Palestinian side, they've got their ultimate argument, which is Hamas though. They say, oh, we just want to get rid of Hamas. But the reality of that is that people who say that are just misunderstanding the entire root cause of the issue. It's like centering the conversation for veganism around animal welfare. Let me explain what I mean. Even if we did have perfect animal welfare, and animals lived all happily and they spent their whole lives at, fucking Disneyland for animals or whatever, you must still kill them. And in that instant, you are doing something unethical, you're doing something wrong. And that is the root of the issue. In a similar fashion, even if I snapped my fingers Thanos style and Hamas just disappeared, people would still be living under a brutal occupation and having their rights denied. And that is unethical, that is wrong, and that is the root of the issue. And by the way, in the West Bank, an area of occupied Palestine that is not controlled by Hamas, Palestinians are still subject to a violent and brutal military rule. So clearly the absence of Hamas does not solve the underlying issue. It's almost as if Hamas is a symptom of the rights violations rather than the root cause of it. And for both veganism and Palestine, you can usually boil down any argument that someone else will say to you to very simple questions. For veganism, does anything ever justify using and killing an animal when it's not necessary? No. And for Palestine, does anything ever justify stripping an entire civilian population of their rights and bombing their children? You better fucking say no. Another thing that these issues have in common is that people think you can take a neutral stance when it comes to these issues. But there really isn't a neutral stance. People don't realize the impact of their actions, whether it be inaction or a direct and willing participation. People's inaction or silence during the ethnic cleansing of Palestine is not neutral. It directly empowers the oppressor. Silence is what Israel needs to continue their onslaught. Similarly, as long as people choose not to be vegan, they are direct and willing participants in violence. So again, you're either on the side of violence or you're on the side of peace. And both movements invoke the, well, what will you tell your grandkids? Or this is the moral compass of our generation. And I agree. What will you tell your grandkids if you're silent during the Palestinian genocide? Or if you knew better but still contributed to the animal massacre? Isn't it hypocritical to stand for one and not the other? Is it not hypocritical to say you stand against violence against the Palestinians, but be an active participant in violence against other beings? Or that you want animals to be treated with respect, but not Palestinians? I certainly think that's hypocritical. If you want to be an effective advocate against oppression, then you gotta be consistent in your anti-oppression. So if you're vegan, I urge you to speak out for Palestine. After all, we are vegan because we stand against injustice, and that should extend to all victims of injustice. And if you believe that people in Palestine deserve their freedom, why don't animals deserve theirs? We all agree that Palestinians don't deserve what's happening to them just because they're Palestinians. So do animals deserve what's happening to them just because they're animals? Or more specifically, just because they're cows and chickens and pigs? And in both cases, you get to decide what side of history you want to be on. The side of violence or the side of peace. And let's say you've now decided you want to be on the right side of history. Great! When it comes to Palestine, the Palestinians are asking us to raise awareness, raise their voices. And that's through social media posts, talking to your friends about it, attending marches, writing to your representative. And there are people on YouTube posting great coverage on the topic. Hassan Piker, David Dowell from The Rational National, and even Noah Samson has made some really good videos about it. I'll link them below. And when it comes to animals, just stop eating them. Stop wearing them. And there's also great content out there to show you how to eat amazing vegan meals like Sweet Simple Vegan or Rainbow Plant Life. Ultimately, you matter and your decisions matter and you can make a difference. So what are you waiting for? We're all counting on you. And just to be clear, during this video, I was comparing oppressed groups to oppressed groups. So if you've made it this far in the video and you're just mad that I compared Palestinians to animals, well, I also compared them to women and gay people. So don't forget to yell at me for that.